Despite being credited with 301 victories and being the second most successful fighter pilot of World War II, Gerhard Barkhorn is, unfortunately, almost forgotten. Major Barkhorn was an East Prussian, and he was the only fighter pilot, apart from Erich Hartmann, to score more than 300 victories. He was a pilot of the famous German 52nd Fighter Wing, the most successful fighter wing of all time. Erich Hartmann was a top scoring ace, but it is worth remembering that 14 other Luftwaffe fighter pilots were credited with more than 200 kills. They all flew on the Eastern Front, apart from one who had the majority of the victories on the Western one. It was Lieutenant Colonel Heinrich Bahr, who scored 124 kills on Western Theater and 96 on Eastern. Gerhard Barkhorn was one of the Luftwaffe Experten. World War I established a convention where a fighter pilot with 5 kills was becoming an ace. The Allies used the same standard during World War II, but the Germans adopted the Experte team, focusing on overall proficiency in combat. The Allies regarded the pilot as exceptional when they achieved 60 kills. If we apply this standard to the Luftwaffe pilots, we will realize that Germans had over 2,500 aces, and the top 35 Luftwaffe pilots had 6,846 kills in total. This gives an average of 196.1 victories per fighter pilot. Barkhorn was born on 20 March 1919 in Königsberg, Prussia. Today, the city is called Kaliningrad and is part of Kaliningrad region, a Russian enclave located between Poland and Lithuania on the Baltic coast. He joined the Luftwaffe in 1937, and a year later, he began his flight training. He did not fly during the Polish campaign, but flew his first sorties during the German invasion of France and the Low Countries in 1940. Young Lieutenant Barkhorn was initially assigned to the 3rd Squadron of the 2nd Fighter Wing, Richthofen, named after the famous World War I pilot Manfred von Richthofen, nicknamed the Red Baron. On 1 August 1940, he was transferred to the 6th Squadron of the 52nd Fighter Wing, the most successful fighter wing of all time, whose pilots claimed over 10,000 victories over enemy planes during the Second World War. The 52nd Fighter Wing exclusively flew the Messerschmitt Bf 109 throughout the war. Barkhorn did not score any victories during the Battle of Britain, and he was shot down twice over the English Channel. As he recalled years later, he was not a fast learner. The first time his oil cooler was riddled by a Spitfire over England. Barkhorn escaped, but was attacked again over the Channel. He was still on the British side, but as the engine of his Me 109 was dead, he decided to bail out. Another pilot from his squadron notified a nearby German motorboat, and it raced to the downed Barkhorn. British speedboats set off as well, trying to get to Barkhorn first. The nearby German boat got to him first, but he learned his lesson and never bailed out again. Barkhorn's unit was transferred to the Eastern Front just before the start of Operation Barbarossa. He claimed his first victory on 2 July 1941 during his 120th mission, shooting down Ilyushin DB-3 bomber. From that moment, his record grew steadily. Although, in his opinion, Yak-9 was his most dangerous opponent on the Eastern Front, he also had a lot of respect for the Polikarpov I-16 fighter plane. Many considered this low-wing fighter obsolete, but Barkhorn could not praise enough its maneuverability. Barkhorn flew a total of 14 planes through the war. Most of them were lost by enemy action. One Messerschmitt that he flew for more than 300 hours was destroyed in a bombing raid. On 21 May 1942, Barkhorn was appointed squadron commander. Operation Citadel, the last German offensive against the Soviets, began in the first week of July 1943. Initially, German pilots saw a limited number of Russian aircrafts, but the situation started to change by the end of the week, and by the end of the summer, there were approximately 10,000 Russian planes on the front. It was a huge number of Soviet planes, but the technical superiority and the experience were on the Luftwaffe's side. This resulted in 1943 being a record year for many German pilots who shot down an unbelievable number of Russian planes. On 30 November 1943, Barkhorn claimed his 200th victory. On his best day, 28 December 1943, he shot down 7 enemy planes. Luftwaffe pilots considered British RAF fighters as the most dangerous. Americans were second, and Soviets were at the bottom of the list, but there were exceptions, mainly Red Guards Regiment flyers. Gerhard Barkhorn had a lot of respect for Soviet pilots. He later recalled a dogfight with a LAGG-3 fighter who he met over Kharkov in late 1943. Despite having better aircraft, he was unable to aim for the Soviet pilot. Sweat was pouring off him, and the dogfight lasted 45 minutes. The fighters had to give up because of the fuel starvation. Barkhorn claimed victories over heroes of the Soviet Union, including Lieutenant Colonel Lev Shestakov and fighter ace Nikolai Klepikov. On 23 January 1944, Barkhorn flew his 1,000th combat mission, becoming the first German pilot to reach this number of sorties. One of the main reasons Luftwaffe pilots were able to fly so many sorties was German fighters' short range. 4 missions a day was standard, and Barkhorn's personal record was 8 sorties in a day. To put things into perspective, his total for the war was 1,104 missions, which is more than 10 times the total of American pilots. Barkhorn's average sortie lasted 70 minutes. For a long time, Barkhorn was a top-scoring Luftwaffe ace. On 31 May 1944, Barkhorn was escorting Stuka ace Hans-Ulrich Rudel on a ground support mission. On the way back, they passed Erich Hartmann, who at one point announced contact with a fleet of Soviet bombers. Barkhorn turned around, heading for them. He was flying his 6th mission that day. His fatigue played a part, and he was shot down by a Russian Air Cobra fighter. He was severely wounded, and he was hospitalized. On 10 September 1944, another pilot of Fighter Wing 52, and at the same time the most successful air ace in history, Erich Hartmann, got married. Gerhard Barkhorn was his best man. Upon returning to the unit, it became apparent that the constant stress caused a lot of psychological damage. Barkhorn could not get rid of anxiety in the cockpit, and even flying with a friendly plane was filling him with fear. It took a long time to overcome it, but he finally returned to combat in October 1944 and kept claiming victories until January 5, 1945, when he claimed his last victory. 2 weeks later, on January 16th, he was appointed Wing Commander 6th Fighter Wing, a unit equipped with Focke-Wulf's FW-190D. Barkhorn did not claim a single victory, and the unit consisted mainly of new recruits, and former Bf-100 pilots suffered heavy losses. Barkhorn had to be taken to hospital due to physical and mental strain. After being discharged, he was invited by Adolf Galland to join his unit of Me-262 jet fighters. He did not score any victories on the Western Front. Barkhorn flew for the last time on 21 April 1945. One of the engines caught fire, and he was forced to make an emergency landing. Despite the presence of P-51s, he managed to land his burning plane and get out. It is worth mentioning that Barkhorn was one of the few German aces who never fell into Soviet hands. He became the Allies' POW and was released in September 1945. After the war, he worked in the automobile industry, but returned to the military service of the West German Air Forces in 1956, and shortly afterwards, he was put in charge of the 31 Fighter Bomber Wing. He was promoted to the rank of colonel, and between October 1964 and November 1965, he was in charge of a West German Air Force mission of the Kestrel Evaluation Squadron at RAF Station in Norfolk, England. Barkhorn's last position was Chief of Staff of the 2nd Allied Tactical Force, a NATA formation. He retired from service in September 1975. Barkhorn died in hospital after a car accident on 6 January 1983, aged 63.